Our guest on this episode of the Stay in the Game podcast is fellow physical therapist, owner of Acadiana Pain and Performance Rehab in Lafayette, Louisiana, and host of the Pain and Performance podcast. Please welcome Dr. Derek Hines.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I ran across Derek a few weeks back, and I really thought this would be a great guest to get for you guys to listen to. It's you know, when you find people that kind of think the way you do to some degree, you really want to spend a lot more time with them. So this is actually all for me, not even for you guys. So thanks for coming on.
Look, that's half the reason that I do this stuff is it would be weird for me to grab from
and ask them all these digging questions. But oh, hey, we're on a podcast. Here's a mic in front of you. Then it seems to be okay. So.
Yeah, so we have a similar background in kind of coming from small town USA, and I wanted to get a little bit of your history in terms of kind of ending up where you were. I know when we met, you were discussing kind of staying in the more complex medical management of these people who had failed PT elsewhere, and I wanted to kind of get some thoughts on that. How did you end up in that kind of space?
So I'll give you my little background. My family is a medical family. My mom was a nurse. My grandfather was a rural primary care physician. And when I was about, 5 to 10 years old, every summer we would go and spend a week with my grandfather while he was seeing patients with a bratty little grandkid nipping at his heels. I have no idea how he had the patience to do some of that stuff, but it definitely affected and gave us that drive to help people. So on some level, that was always going to be in the future, was figuring out ways to help people. And for me, I'm a terrible rule follower, and so I was like, I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna do it in my own way. I'm gonna find another path in to help people. And so I started looking for different avenues to be able to create impact. I wasn't a big fan of the modern medical model of prescriptions and surgery and time. And so I was trying to find a path into it. And I came across who ended up being my first mentor, a doctor from Kentucky who happened to be in Louisiana. And we met and started listening to him talk and explain health and explain changes to patients and put his hands on patients. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I want to do it. It's like sports and healthcare and education and teaching all wrapped up into this beautiful little ball. And that kind of started my education process into the physical therapy world and the health and the kind of pain world, because he was very good with his hands. And so he started to get this reputation for, if you failed, the old school, rehab of do some exercises, do the hot pack stuff. This was still kind of during that time. Then go to this guy. He does a lot of hands-on stuff. And so, that was the first big introduction to it. I went to LSU Med in New Orleans, and we had a very interesting class. We had all kinds of changes. And so, we had a great education in some ways. We had a very challenging education in a lot of ways. Our manual therapy professor passed away my second year of school. We changed presidents of the school while I was there. So I very quickly said, I'm just going to go find the best people to study under. We get to do these residency things. I'm going to go and ask and beg people to take me. I'll clean the floors after clinic hours. Just let me be there. They're letting me set up wherever I want to go. And when I look back, that thought that I could set something up to study with people actually carried me much further. But I started doing that and traveled around the country and got to study with some absolutely brilliant doctors and PTs, and realized really quickly, if these people were the best and we were still getting patients who were already damaged and injured and having chronic pain, something about the way we were addressing pain and problems was broken. The system was broken already before the patient even got in the door. And so that kind of took me into the like, it can't be like this all over the world idea. And I started reaching out and seeing if I could go and study abroad with doctors in different countries that had different ways of doing some of these things. And so that took me, to Europe, South America, Thailand, Croatia, Spain, and studied with some absolutely amazing doctors and practitioners of all backgrounds. And a lot of what I started to realize was that they addressed health first and we addressed sickness first. We addressed the problem first, and they started looking at what is the base level of health, and then let's build up from there. And it's a small twist, and it doesn't seem like a drastic thing, but when you actually put that into healthcare, it's everything. It means that, we're looking at do people have the basic building blocks of health in their body now to function like they should? And if not, let's fix that before we start just kind of, pouring fuel on the fire as we tend to do here.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, if you boil this down and simplify it really, and happens in every aspect of life, when we're trying to fix things at the effect level, rather than the cause level, it just does not work. It doesn't work. You see it in politics, you see it in PT, you see it in medicine, you see it everywhere.
Well, I even take that to surgeries. Like when we look at the effect of, let's say, a disc bulge or a disc herniation, and we look at that and we think that that is the problem inherently, that this disc has herniated out and it's pressing into the nerves, and that's why someone's having pain. If you really get down deeper and you look at, like, that disc has no forces by itself, it's just a structure in there. So it has to be being affected by outside forces. And that's the muscles and the structures around that. That's the movement that's happening around it. So if there's a problem with that disc, the disc is not the problem. The disc is the symptom of what the underlying problem is. So if we go in and we do a surgery to that disc and we haven't corrected that underlying problem, we still haven't addressed the true cause of that issue. And if that's that they've got this severe imbalance in their body, we see it all the time. Hip flexors are incredibly tight. It's causing compression across the front of the disc. It's squeezing all those structures down. It's creating this posterior force in the disc. They can go and do a surgery and do a fusion or do a disc replacement. And if that situation is still present in the body, what happens? The segments above or below are next. And, those broke down too because of that. Or they do that surgery and the pain's still there. The problem's still there. We didn't actually get there down to the root cause of the problem and make any change. We were just doing a very expensive intervention to a symptom of the problem.
Exactly. And it's for me, like, following all these great people for you to learn from and get kind of some of this insight. For me, it's always been, how do I look at this problem like a 4-year-old and just say, why? Like you see the disc bulge. Why? All right. What precipitated that tightness in the hip flexor? Why did that happen? Can we go back to because ultimately the output was the disc bulge. It's usually 5 steps prior to the disc bulge where the fixing of the problem actually has to happen.
Yeah, the 3 whys, like we talk about it all the time. Like, it hurts here. Why? Well, because this is happening. Why? Well, because I am doing this every day. Now we got to our initial, problem that we want to fix. What is the source? But yeah, I mean, me and you met, we were talking business and stuff. And this is the same way in business. It's like when there's a problem in your business, it usually stems from something 3 or 4 steps back that was done incorrectly, or that's where it started and it continued to progress until, we see this problem here. Well, where did that actually start? Where is the issue that we need to fix? And it's never right there. It's never right around what the problem is. It's always kind of somewhere back throughout that process. There was something going on 3 or 4 steps away that actually kind of started some of the issues. So it's interesting how some of that stuff ties into many different, biology, physiology, movement, business.
For sure. And back to kind of the problem, I think this is why there is kind of an epidemic of pain because people start to see, well, I have this sciatic nerve problem, and somebody told me about this muscle, the piriformis, and if I just go see a massage therapist and rub out this tight muscle, then I'm going to have this problem solved. It's like there's just not enough good guidance of where people need to go to solve these, what to us is a pretty simple, straightforward problem.
Well, we're in a weird time where it used to be that when you had a problem, you needed to go to the expert for the answer. Now we're in this issue where there's so much information out that when we have a problem, we get bombarded with all of these solutions that some people have tried and worked for them and have made the mistake that if it works for me, it should work for everyone with this problem. Unfortunately, that's not how the body works. You and I can have the exact same pain where we're experiencing pain in our body physically. Like I feel it in my shoulder, you feel it in your shoulder. And those two things, the causes of those two can be coming from completely different areas. So if you just pull up the information and it's like, oh, you got shoulder pain, you need to do this. Now we're actually having to find experts and professionals so that we can weed through all the information that we have to actually find the one that pertains to us. Not that it's bad information. It's just may not have to do with what we need to improve our own health.
Sure. I mean, I want to go back. So I know you mentioned kind of a system being broken. Where's the breakdown in your estimation?
I find it in two areas, and I see this whenever I've studied abroad and how their education system is set up to educate not just healthcare but education across the board. What we've taken out in a lot of areas of our education is the analysis part, the critical thinking part for even kids, but definitely in healthcare. Is that the three whys of really pulling back and analyzing what's going on in situations. Why is that the answer? Is that the real answer? If the research says that, is it good research? Why is that happening? And because of the way that we educate and the way that that's set up, all of our healthcare practitioners get out and they're already thinking in a certain pathway. And it's really hard once you get in that pathway of thinking to get out of it, to take yourself out of it. This is why a lot of the people I listen to around health are more in the PhD world, because the one good thing is by the time you get to pursue a PhD, they have to reprogram. I've talked to all of them. They're like, you have to reprogram your thinking that you've had through education all the way up until this point. And we have to scramble all that stuff that you learned through childhood, through college, and you have to start learning to think a different way if you're gonna start to look at data and information differently. They don't have a dog in the fight. They just want to know what works and what doesn't, and what's the research say, and is it good research? If we could do that more, then I think some of these, maybe less expensive interventions, maybe easier interventions, maybe less profitable interventions, if you're looking at insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies, wouldn't be the first place that we would start. So that's the second answer to it. Is I think first it's education. Second is the power that we've given to the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies in this country. I had a friend of mine that I trained with overseas, who's a doctor in Japan, who came and visited me quite a few years ago. And her biggest takeaway was, why in the world are we advertising drugs on TV? She could not for the life of her understand that we were doing drug advertisements for health problems on TV. I was like, well, the drug companies figured out that if they did that and they went straight, then the patient would go in and ask the doctor and they made more money. She was like, yeah, but that's not good for them. They don't know anything about medicine. Like, they don't need to be worrying about that. But that's how foreign it was for her that we were allowing, that type of practice to happen. And so, I love business, and I love, the ability, if you help a lot of people, for you to do well. I think you should be able to, do incredibly well for yourself if you're helping a lot of people. But I also think there's a responsibility that comes with that, that if you are in that situation, that the things that you're giving people should be the, most efficient and, minimum effective dose. And we start there. We don't skip over all of that stuff and give you a medication that in some situations is needed and necessary, but in 80% of them, we could have fixed that problem in a much easier way. I think there's probably a lot of answers to that question, but if you really dig into it, those two probably are the root for a lot of it.
So when we talk about kind of the minimum dose, so when you're applying some of your treatment techniques, tell me, I mean, obviously, when we talked about your specific practice dealing with, again, more complex pain type conditions, what kind of tools do you employ that maybe the typical in-network, insurance-based PT might not be using?
Yeah, we look at when someone comes in with a pain problem, there's to me there's kind of three components to that. There's the physical part of it, there's the chemical part of it, and then there's kind of your belief, mental, emotional component of it. And so what we're trying to do is identify where the primary problem lies in that. And so, really, really doing a great assessment of what's going on with somebody. I can't tell you how many people I get in the door who say, like, they went, to a doctor, they went somewhere, and the person never put their hands on them. The image does not tell us anything about pain generation. And so, when we're looking at an MRI or an X-ray, I'm sure you've talked about this on your stuff, but that may have absolutely nothing to do with your pain. And the only way that I can find that out is if I get my hands on you, I start getting you to move, we start stressing different structures. What are you feeling? Are you getting a pain response from that? So that's probably the start, is really getting a great idea of, does this problem lie in the physical part? Does this lie in the chemical part? And so for us, we're always trying to look at, what do you have in your body? So if we can get tests done to find out, the nutrient makeup in the tissues, in the blood, I like both of those. I think a blood test tells us a lot of how your body is regulating these things really well, and looking at micronutrient makeup and hormone production and inflammatory markers in the blood is really, really helpful. I'd say over the last few years, we started looking at doing these like tissue screening, micronutrient screening, and a lot of that's done by a hair sample that's mailed off. And the reason we started adding that in was I was talking with a doctor, and he was like, look, your body's going to regulate your blood very, very highly. If a problem ends up in your bloodstream, your body could no longer maintain that balance. And so it's really a problem now. He was like, but in your tissues, your body will say, like, oh, I'll shunt that stuff out of the bloodstream and just store it in the tissues for now. It'll be fine. So we started running these kind of hair analysis to find out what is in the body from kind of a storage standpoint in the tissues, which for us is a lot of what we're trying to treat, right? We're treating problems in the tissues. So I want that balance in there. If we find, issues in that aspect, this leads to why we do all the advanced stuff that we do in our clinic, because when we'd find a physical problem, we had the tools to fix it. And for quite a few years, that's what we were doing. And then we started looking at, well, this isn't the only component of health or pain. There is this chemical component. Well, if we're trying to make our patients more successful in recovery, how do we address that chemical component? Is that education? Is that technology? Is that lifestyle? Is that supplementation? And so that added a layer to the practice of, we're not doing anything to help this, and I can give you the best physical treatment in the world, but if your inflammatory markers are through the roof, your body is so busy putting out fires all over the place that, if we're like, hey, go change the light bulb, one of my guests was like, there's fires all over the house, and you're like, go change the light bulb in the attic. You're like, no. That's what our body's doing. All these resources are all over the body, and it's like, yeah, I know there's a little rotator cuff injury. That's the least of my concerns right now. I'm just trying to keep us alive today. We can worry about the rotator cuff another time. So that's where a lot of the advancement stuff came in, was starting to look at, what are the components that make up health? How can we start to look at them and find out what's going on in each of those components? And then what do we have that can improve it? Because we don't want to just tell you got a problem. What can we do that adds in something? So you're like,
Right.
tell me a solution.
So now that you've kind of added that layer, as you said, into your practice and started looking at the blood and looking at tissue, what are some techniques that you employ to try to, I don't know, try to balance that out or detoxify this client to get them the outcome they're looking for?
Yeah, we kind of walk the line. So I think that there's this giant gap between what like old school rehab is, like exercise hot pack stuff. Terrible, right? If you're anybody listening, if that's what you're going there and you're thinking, oh, I can do this at home, you can do it at home. Find somebody else. And then your orthopedic and your like stem cell type treatment. I think those are on the two polar ends of the spectrum. And then there's this giant gap in between that can really make a huge difference in people's lives. And I think the perfect profession to take that up is your conservative healing profession. I think your PTs, well educated in movement, in health, in function, chiropractors in a lot of sense can step in there. I think a lot of the osteopaths have a good handle on motion and how the body is all intertwined, probably better than a lot of the allopathic medicine. They have an amazing education in like diagnostics in terms of like keeping us healthy when something serious has happened, but in optimizing our everyday function, it's not as well suited for that. So in that gap, I find like regenerative therapy and functional therapy to be something that we should just be learning as much as we can as PTs and as a profession, and helping as many people as we can with that. So what that looks like to us is like, if somebody comes in and we find out that you're having problems, with whatever body part, you're having a low back issue, and we see that you have significantly high inflammatory markers. For us to get your back to heal, for your body to get all those healing agents, which it does naturally if we have a good immune system. When you cut yourself, you don't think I have to do anything. You cover it up and let your body heal it. That's what we want the inside to do. But if our immune system is overrun with inflammation, it's not going to be able to do that. So we start looking at what can we do from three aspects. We need like an input, so that's the food or supplements, a behavioral change, and an activity change. Can we change one or two of those to make it better? So if you're eating an inflammatory diet, then we want you to pull those things out. And a lot of times we'll tell them, look, if it's really high, let's just do like a flush, and we'll have you do a fasting mimicking diet for 5 days. We'll flush all the inflammation out, and then we'll start new. If you are eating well and your body's just having trouble keeping up, then we may want to start adding in an activity like cryotherapy consistently. So they're getting in a cryo chamber. Ours is like the true whole body cryo chamber that you walk in. So you're getting the air in. It's all around your head and neck where all of these receptors are. And they spend like 3.5 minutes in there. And, then we're also going to look at, do we need to add in some supplementation? Are we looking at omega-3s? Are we looking at like a good turmeric compound, something that's a bit more natural than like an NSAID that blocks the healing process, but helps your body handle inflammation better, process inflammation better. We don't want to block inflammation per se. But if we have so much of these inflammatory markers in our body and we don't bring them down, our body can't hear the inflammatory markers from the main problem. So that's kind of how we would think about it. Does that make a little bit of sense?
It does, and I think we speak kind of the same language when we discuss inflammation. It's like inflammation's necessary because there are markers within that kind of chemical response for your body to send help to remodel those tissues. And if we just delay that for 4 hours, all right, did I just delay my healing 4 hours? Did I make that tissue healing incomplete for the trade-off of just getting that temporary kind of fix in terms of what I feel symptomatically? So I think, yeah, there is a better way to manage inflammation. And you mentioned kind of turmeric as, the classic one, herbal that most people have heard of. For me, I would probably go a little step deeper in terms of trying to go to like bromelain and papain, which are proteolytic enzymes. And people are talking and doing a lot more research on fibrin and its component of trying to fibrin being something that actually can cause a lot of pain in connective tissue. So there's a ton of things out there to try to get your
Yeah,
body
and
moving.
I think that's probably one of the difficult things is like when we start to go into this, there's an education component, and I mean I appreciate you doing this and putting the podcast out because I do think going back to your question of where is the breakdown, on some level we have to take responsibility as a member of society that we've been at least part of this kind of quick fix idea. And so for us to start putting out the information that is, look, it's not, here's the one thing, it's a little more nuanced in there. If we're really trying to get to the heart of some of these problems, we've got to be putting out information for people to learn and to start taking responsibility for their health and the activities that we need to put into it. So we're always trying to go through like, okay, if I'm giving you the perfect healing situation, here's what I do. Now that might look like 6 different things. Let's not start with all of those. Let's do these 3 that are going to make an absolute difference over the next 6 to 8 weeks. And then we can start layering in these other 2 or 3 things that might be what gets me from 80% to 100%. What we find a lot if somebody's had chronic pain is that when we start doing these things, we start addressing the physical function and the position and the imbalance in the body. We start improving the chemical. We start splashing in through our conversations a little bit of change in the belief patterns and the mindset around it, that we can get you to 70 to 80% very, very consistently. From 80% to 100%, we're going to have to work very, very closely as a team to get there. And at the beginning of that, it may be 80% of us and 20% of you. And as we go through that, it's going to start to flip. And that last 5% might be 98% you doing the work and 2% us saying, great job, keep doing it, keep going, you're on the right track. But it is a life cycle of that, the kind of where does the activity happen and then who's responsible for it, and it flips once we get towards the end of the healing cycle, the pain cycle, the health dysfunction, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. So, I mean, tell me about, yeah, I know you mentioned kind of getting cryo on board, but tell me, I know you do a whole lot more integrative type style of intervention. So tell me about some of the emerging technologies you're using to treat some of these things, and how did you get a hold of a lot of this stuff? How did this come into your world?
Yeah, a lot of our technology that we have starts from what problem are we trying to solve for the patient? How do we make our patients more successful in their health journey? And so, in the beginning stage where cryo came from was we realized that if they were inflamed and they were dealing with systemic inflammation, we needed to solve that problem or they weren't going to be as successful as they could be. As we got through that and started seeing the results, we also started seeing that a lot of these injured areas did not get good blood flow. And we started looking, how can we help solve that problem? Is it hyperbaric? Is it, another type of technology? Is it sauna? And we came across PEMF therapy, which, I know you've talked about it on here quite a bit, but does a great job of oxygenating tissue and getting nutrients and blood flow into these tissues that may be hypovascular. They don't get great blood flow and nutrients. Part of the reason they're difficult to heal. But if we could add that layer in and help solve that problem, then we're going to make this even more effective. Whatever treatment we're doing physically, we're going to make more effective by actually getting all these healing agents in there. As we added that in and we started looking at patient results, the few patients that didn't get all the way better, we started looking at like what was going on with them. And one thing we found and obviously we dig in and we do a lot of testing with this, is that their cellular function, their mitochondrial function and energy production from their cell was not up to par. And so how can we affect that? How can we affect mitochondria? A lot of people on here will probably remember mitochondria from like, what, 7th grade science, like the powerhouse of the cell. I think that's the one thing that everybody remembers from it, which is fantastic. It's an important part of us. And so we started looking at that. Can we affect that in some way? So we come across photobiomodulation or infrared laser therapy. Those things can really increase mitochondriogenesis, your body's production of mitochondria in the cells, so that now if we've cleared inflammation out of the body and we've got blood flow to these cells, do they have the energy to use that oxygen effectively in whatever method? So that can be performance or function, but that can also be healing. So they can actually use that to produce healing energy more effectively. And so that adds that layer on. And then we start looking, well, if we get them better and they feel good, but they go back to living the life that they were living, eating the things that they were eating, moving how they were moving, then the chance that they end up back in my office is going to be very high. And so that is kind of, a lot of what we look at now is education, and how do we get them the information of what they should be doing after all of these things. So if you're looking at, changing diet, we know that that's a difficult thing. I'm in South Louisiana. So, look, we like our fried food. We like our jambalaya. We love our gumbo. Everything is like a roux with rice.
That's it.
So that's a lot of, as we look towards the future of some of this stuff, it's like, can we start to not only take them through this cycle of healing and regenerating healthy tissue, but can we also have some stuff after the fact that's going to teach them how to continue using this newfound health so that they can live longer, they can live better, they can be with their family, they can go after their goals, they can do all the things that they want to do. Pain is a really good motivator. And so right after that, there's this little window where we remember how bad pain was. And we have a little extra motivation to carve out some time in our schedule to do some health stuff. So while we have that, I'm like, okay, let's set it down right now. Take action. You have a goal. We got to take action right away, or we know that the chance that we go after that goal is much lower. So that's how we've added a lot of this stuff. Is all came from like, how, the patient-centered standpoint. What do we need to do to make a patient's health better? And what problems are in there that we're not solving now? So I know that's a lot. One thing that has recently changed with that was we start looking at someone who doesn't have the physical ability to heal tissue. So, when we're younger, our body does a really good job of regenerating tissue, and that starts to go down as we get older. So if you look at like a 50-year-old who is trying to repair a meniscus tear or a rotator cuff tear, it's just harder. And so we started looking at, I can fix the functional issues, but you actually have unhealthy tissue in there that needs to be repaired. So what things could we do on top of some of these technologies that would help? And so a lot of that has come into like the regenerative therapy world. So we're looking at a lot of the peptides, and what we've found is if we're doing those therapies, if we're getting rid of inflammation, getting blood flow and nutrients to the tissues and stimulating, cell energy, and we put someone on a regenerative peptide, if it's a tendon, we're probably looking at something like BPC 157 that does a really good job. Very, very safe profile. Very, very effective in improving, growth response in the tissue, especially like tendons, ligaments. And there's been some studies done on nerve regeneration. When we put that together and we marry that, it's incredibly effective at addressing the root cause and kind of generating some new tissue in there that's now healthy.
Yeah, when we don't have that fundamental foundational ability to mend tissue, I mean, as you said, you can do everything perfectly. You're just going to be stuck. So going back to kind of like that 50-year-old and how you described it is kind of how like we educate our clients is that at the age of 30, that tissue regeneration starts to decline at a rate of about 1% a year. And it's because enzymatic production starts to decline at that rate. So literally the peptides are taking place of your body's natural kind of enzymatic production. So when your body's shutting down that production, you can kind of supplement those type of things to allow tissues to regenerate. So tell me about these peptides. Is this kind of more of an oral supplementation, or are you getting kind of a weekly kind of intramuscular injection? What's the source? What's the delivery mechanism for the peptides?
Yeah, I think if people start digging into it, you're going to find that a lot of peptides are not going to be orally available. The vast majority are not. There's a few that are topical that can be absorbed through there. BPC 157 is kind of a strange one in that it's found in our gastric acids, in our stomach acids. And there's certain companies that have figured out really, really good ways to get an oral form of BPC in and absorbed really well, because it is found in gastric acid. So our stomach acids don't just break it down right away. So what we've found is that the oral application of one like BPC is just as effective as doing an injectant, like a subcutaneous injection. Most of them, it's not like a hard injection, like they're giving, like the most common peptide in the world is insulin. So that one's given, many people have to give themselves insulin shots around the world. There's quite a few other ones that fall in that world. From physical regeneration, BPC, it's very fortuitous that is the one we can take orally and get a lot of effect. Now, the one thing I'll say that we've found with BPC 157 is that you need a stimulant, or your body's just going to take it in and start repairing a bunch of stuff. And that may be like stomach lining stuff. That's why it's in our body, is to repair a lot of the stomach tissues and tissues around there. If we have enough of it, it starts to go and just repair tissue in general. So we find like 500 micrograms a day is a perfect dose. People do really, really well on it. Joint issues. We did a study on meniscus tears, and we took them 2 months through. They were doing everything. They were filling out all our surveys. We're going to end up putting the data out because it was incredible. And this ran from January to March of this year, and we started getting calls over the last couple of months of like people saying, "Hey, can I do another round?" I was like, "Well, what's happening? Is your knees bothering you again?" "No, I'm not having any knee pain, but my hands had stopped hurting completely, and I was having like neck pain occasionally, or headaches, and I'm not having any of that stuff." One of them came and said like, she was like, "I had stopped running because I had big toe pain." She had a really bad bunion on her big toe, and she sends us a picture of her big toe. She was like, "Look, it looks okay now. Like, it doesn't look bad. Can I do another round?" With all of these people, what we were doing was they were taking the peptide to regenerate, and we were doing dry needling and like soft tissue work, joint work around the problem area. So we're trying to address the physical functional problem that's in there, and we're trying to stimulate a healing response using dry needling, which is basically what it does. Is it goes in, it makes your body think that there's a new problem, so it needs to send nutrients there. That only works if nutrients are being produced, if they can get to that area and the cells can actually do the work that we're asking them to do. So when we look at the research behind that, I'm like, how many people have those three things being addressed whenever we do a dry needling research study? Not very many. And so that's where I think it is difficult to study some of these things. But so we were doing needling in and around the knee. We were doing a lot of physical treatment to the knee and trying to align that. And I know this isn't a great, double-blind placebo-controlled trial. But the results that they got versus the results that the patients that didn't do the peptide versus the patients who were doing home exercises. So we had a group that just did exercises for the 2 months. It's an absolutely incredible change. It's not a powerful study because it was only 10 people in each group. You'd love to repeat that with 100, but it's enough proof of concept for us to keep going with it. So, that one. It's very nice that we can get it in orally because it is the most physical of peptides in terms of like changing tendons, ligaments, muscle injuries, and nerve injuries. For things like vascular and blood flow, there are some that people need to inject. There's another one we use for scar tissue, like skin scar tissue, called GHK copper. That's a topical peptide that helps regenerate healthy skin. And we've done a lot where we'll combine that with the infrared, the photobiomodulation stuff for people with like psoriasis plaques, for painful scar tissue after surgery, after chemotherapy and things like that. It is very, very impressive to see what some of the changes these people are getting whenever they're combining those things.
So at this point, I mean, I'm sure a lot of listeners who are like tuning into a PT podcast are like, wait, you treat what now? Because most people are like, oh, you're a PT. Can you take a look at this shoulder? I mean, definitely we have the knowledge base and the education, and like you said, with this gap of the lousy garbage PT doing kind of exercise and hot packs, and the extreme of going to surgery, as you said, this gap is massive, and you've clearly kind of not just stepped foot in, but did the Nestea plunge into that gap and are dominating.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. I think that we are perfectly positioned as a profession to be we're the movement specialists, but we should be the functional specialist in terms of how do we help people function better in their lives. To do that, we're looking at more, but our education is a whole lot more than it ever was. Starting to continue and push that stuff forward. I think we should be taking all of that gap up, and we should be, grabbing what areas excite us as individuals, and continuing to push that and get that information out to our patients and help more people, so that we get to a point in the future. I really believe there's a point where if we do all this stuff right, that surgery becomes a thing that is emergency only. That, something happened, in an extreme emergency situation, and we need surgery. I think the vast majority of the rest of that is things that we can correct if we do the right things, like we were talking about earlier, 5 steps ago. And I think that is a possible thing in the future, if we can continue pushing this forward. Do the data, do the research, communicate, get the education out there, and implement some of the changes. Healthcare has been very slow to implement changes over the history of the last, quite a few hundred years. Some of that's good because, we're not just going out there and doing frivolous things. But I think there's probably a closer balance to, these are the things that are proven safe, and theoretically, these are the things that can really move the needle forward. Let's get some of the data clinically and see how much we can help. And I think if we do that, then we get to this world where it's like, pain is not this dirty word that everybody's talking about. That's just a signal of something that we need to improve, and we know that we've got systems in place to help those things improve and heal. And that really changes the world. I tell my staff that all the time. Like, you are really changing the world. How many great inventions, how many great discoveries, or great businesses, or great people were not as effective as they could have been because they were in pain.
That's a fact. And I mean, ultimately, people who are listening to this are going to be like, man, this is so completely different from what I've heard in the past. Do you get a lot of pushback? Do you get a lot of haters? Do you get a lot of kind of negativity toward kind of your thought process, or a lot of pushback, per se, in terms of the treatment approach?
I don't know. No, I'm just like, online, of course, when we're putting some of this information out there, I've gotten quite good at really trying to live on the data. So if somebody gives me pushback, there's always studies coming out. I do post TikTok videos that talk about this stuff. I do think it's a nice way for people to consume information, and it is inevitable. You'll get some pushback of like bro science, or the quackery, or these people who honestly don't. I'm a skeptic by nature. I am skeptical of everything, and we're kind of known for being the advanced clinic, and so we get thrown everything all day, every day. And my initial response to 95% of it is, oh, another one. And then, you got to start digging in and do your due diligence. But anytime I get pushed back, there's nothing that we do that's not backed by some level of science. I'm not saying that we're only going to be beholden to double-blind placebo-controlled trials, because then you would just never be able to do hardly anything that impact people's lives. But we're going to have a really sound explanation for something that makes it to our patients from a scientific standpoint, from a study standpoint, from a practical standpoint. We're trying to check all of those boxes. So when we get pushed back, we see, look, we treat 300 to 400 people a week. We've got a pretty good cohort of how this is actually affecting people's lives. And so I think that it goes back to that is we're doing this for people. So if we get pushed back from some talking head online, it doesn't bother me.
Well, I'm glad you can push that aside. Typically, when you do get that pushback, you should know that you're on the right path, because, I mean, any new innovation is immediately rejected, that it's hated upon, and then, eventually people get to the level of acceptance. So hopefully we can, through even this outlet, assist in making that transition to acceptance happen.
I'll tell you, the interesting thing is, if I do get pushed back, guess who it's from? PTs.
I can see that a lot, because I think I really see that a lot of our brethren, and I don't want to bash them. It's people have been in the field even 10 or 20 years like I have. It's like they've been in the industry 1 year 20 times. It's like they have not upskilled themselves at all. The thing that they learned the day they left school, they have not progressed from it. And sadly, you mentioned kind of hot packs and just giving some exercises. Sadly, that's what's around me still. And I just scratch my head like, man, like, how can this still be happening?
Yeah, it's interesting, because so I started, when we think about this, like, solving problems idea, and like, what is it? A lot of the education starts to take you out of our profession. And whenever I go and speak at conferences with other professions, like, it's amazing how excited they are to hear this stuff. Like, I went to a conference with a bunch of dentists and orthodontists, and when we started talking about this, afterwards, there was a line of people like, tell us more about it. How can we tap into this stuff? And you do the same conversation with a bunch of PTs, and they're like, I know a better way to do that. And that's, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do it that way. We should do it like this. It's an interesting thing. I hope it's changing. I think there's more collaboration and understanding that we all have slightly different specialties now. So I hope it continues to get better, where we're building each other up as opposed to tearing each other down. But
it is kind of weird, because I was speaking at the same conference that we met with some other PTs, and they were describing the use of laser, and their new grad PT is like, oh, you're placebo light. And it's like, do you know the history of anything that you're speaking of? So this stuff has been studied. Low-level laser therapy has been studied since the 1950s by Andre Mester. And how did he figure out that low-level lasers actually caused photobiostimulation? Do you know the actual first study? He took two groups of laboratory rats, shaved their backs, and separated them, and then irradiated half with a low-level ruby laser. What did everybody think in the 1950s laser did? The same thing everybody thinks everything does right now. They think lasers caused cancer. So they needed to prove that lasers caused cancer. So they irradiated those one group of mice. And at the end of the study, 4 weeks later, what did they find? That the hair grew back faster on the group that got laser. It actually stimulated something to happen. So, down it comes. And literally it took until 2002, a General Motors study, for laser to get approved by the FDA in the United States. So I sat with the gentleman that actually brought the first laser to market. I don't know if you knew anything about that, Derek, but he was in Japan trying to identify some of these surgical lasers, and he identified that low-level laser was actually healing people. So it took him almost 10 years to get this approved. And what it took was getting all the people on the assembly line at General Motors that all have what? Carpal tunnel from all their repetitive stress injuries. So blood flow studies, grip strength tests, nerve conduction studies, and at the end, the biggest thing between your double-blind placebo-controlled trial was the people who got sham laser and rehab, 42% were back to work. At the end of it, the people who got real laser, 72% were back on the job. So yes, nerve conduction studies were better, blood flow was better, but literally these people were working, and that's what General Motors gave a shit about.
Yeah, yeah, they're like, I don't care what you say, we're going to be doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's literally what got the FDA to finally pull the trigger and say 2002, you're approved. So for me in clinical practice, I was probably one of the first on board in 2003 with the first laser to come to market. It's the one I still use to this day.
Well, and I mean, you've heard me talk. Everything to me comes back to people. And, when we look at this stuff, it's like we can read all the studies, we can do all of that stuff. It comes back to how are we impacting people's lives with these things, and being honest about what's going on with a lot of it, being honest about where the science is at, but having real conversations with our patients, and remembering that, like, that's what this is all about, is how do we improve lives through all of this stuff, whether it's education, treatment, communication, technology. Like, it's coming back. We're doing it for a purpose. We can argue with it all day long. The only person who's getting affected negatively is the patient. So,
Well, on that same degree is like we're getting all this great technology that's out, and there's kind of a just a local phenomenon. I don't know if it's happening nationally. It's just stuff that I've seen, a kind of a trend that kind of recovery lounges or studios are doing: cryocompression, percussion, stretch, and like hyperbarics. But literally nobody in the building has any type of medical education. I mean, I'm not like, I love the technology in the right hands, but I'm just not. I don't know really fully how to feel about it just yet. I mean, what is your take?
yeah, I think of that, and somebody's going to hate this response. I think of that like I think of the joint. I don't know if y'all have any of those around you.
We do.
The joint chiropractic place. Like, people go in there, they get cracked. They're not really trying to change anything. It's just kind of going through the routine of it. It feels good. It's kind of a surface level treatment. We're not really doing any diagnostic stuff. I think of those in that term. I think for the majority, these are very nice things because they're safe. So I think a lot of people, if they're just wanting to do it because it makes them feel better, then I'm okay with that. I think when we start to get more specific and we're looking at somebody who's got health issues, then it becomes a lot more important in terms of dosage, time, integration. How much are we putting them together? What are we putting with them? Then it needs to be in the hands of somebody who understands the entire picture of the diagnosis, the health problem, the physical problem. When they start to venture into that and put their toe on that side of it, I get a little bit nervous with it. I think, if you just say, hey, this makes you feel good, will give you energy, gives you some endorphins. If you want to do it, come do it. If you want it as part of your, kind of recovery or sleep routine or whatever it might be. I love those therapies personally. Like, I use a lot of these things. I think the way that we use them integrated into a healthcare setting is much different than, doing it just as like a, kind of a fun party trick type of thing.
Right. I think it becomes just you're at the mall and you say, you want it, I have it. Do you want to get it? It's like for us, if we were to do something like that, it's treatment without assessment. For us, it's malpractice. But somebody off the street can just, provide this without having really a full understanding of really what's happening with that individual that they're taking these people through. So I think you're right in terms of it being in our hands and being able to structure it within and integrate it within a healthcare setting. It's going to be way more powerful in the hands of the people who actually understand how to use the tools.
Yeah, and a lot of those things are kind of layers. We're adding on top of different things. For us, if we looked at the knee study that we did with patients on the regenerative, I think one of the biggest aspects of that was that they were getting good education and hands-on treatment and a stimulus to heal. If they were just going through, the hands-off part of that, would that have been as effective? There's no way, absolutely not. And we proved that. So, that's where it starts to get a little bit tricky is, if we can start saying that those are doing the same things as if you were under, professionally trained in diagnostic eyes, that's where I don't like that part of it. But I think getting people more access to it, because look, a lot of medical clinics do not have this stuff. And so if somebody's listening, they're like, I like that intervention, but no one in my area has it. It's harder. But if you found a great practitioner who will spend the time and give you a diagnosis, and you are going and getting the treatment, you got some running around to do, but you can probably start to set up some of these healing situations on your own, even if it is kind of running around. We treated a few professional athletes, and I realized how small the world was for them when they said, like, I have an off day, I'm flying in to get treated. And I was like, well, you are like halfway across the country. They were like, well, if I fly there, I'll be there for 90 minutes. You'll treat me. I'll run through everything in the back, and then I'll fly back. I would have to drive around town for 2 or 3 hours to get all this stuff done. And I was just like, oh, that's a different answer than 99% of the population would have. But
yeah, for sure.
But so I do understand that there's an access issue with it. But
yeah, for sure. Understood. Well, anything else you want to tell the world? What is your message? What is our big message? What do you have to send out to these people who are in pain? Who, well, I guess at this point, a lot of people who come to you. I mean, how many people are actually coming to you saying, "I've tried everything," and then you have this wonderful world of things that nobody's ever tried? What is your message to tell people who have struggled with pain for so long to finally get access to something like what you have to offer?
My real message behind all this stuff is hope. Like, I get really excited when a patient comes in after their 2-month protocol and they're healthy and they're not hurting. I don't like that interaction as much as I like the second visit when they've done everything that we're asking and they say, like, I feel different. I see things changing. I feel things changing. And you see that hope return to them again. That is possible for everyone. Like, and it may not be exactly with the stuff that we do, but there is something out there that will help you get healthier, get out of pain, and improve your life. Keep going until you find that. Continue pushing forward, continue trying different things, treat everything like a 90-day experiment. Is it improving things? If yes, maybe it's, tweak it, add it. It needs to be more consistent. I need more time with it. But there is definitely hope. The natural nature of the human body is not to be in pain. We just have to find what is the root cause of some of that stuff and be consistent with some of the changes, and you can absolutely get out of pain and live a pain-free life. So
that's a wonderful message for our audience, man. I appreciate you coming on, and that's a great way to end it, man. Like, literally, for anybody struggling out there who's thought they've tried it all, don't give up. There is hope out there. You just got to turn one more stone.
That's it. Yeah. So keep looking. I've got. I'll give the humble plug. I've got a book coming out here soon about all of this stuff. If I could sit and work with a patient individually and go through everything, that's what it's meant to be. Is like my hand holding through this whole process of what to do, what habits work, what technologies work, what peptides work, what testing should you do to know if all this stuff is going the right way. So you can go to Derek Hines, 2 R's, ICK.com/book, and you can sign up and start getting some of the pre-release swag that we got coming out of some of the videos and information and stuff before it gets out. So that's the best place to kind of get more of this information.
Fantastic. We'll share it out on all of our channels as well, and hopefully the next time we speak, you'll be a bestseller.
Just a seller, I'll be happy.
Well, literally, one person buys it and it changes their life. It was worth the time that you put into it, man. So
you hit it on the head. That's exactly it.
Fantastic. Perfect. Well, thanks for coming on. Enjoyed having you.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it immensely. I love what you're doing over there. Keep pushing forward, man. Y'all are doing amazing stuff. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks again.